The north wind in Wyoming Territory, in the year 1873, was not a wind that whispered. It was a wind that screamed. It came down from the mountains with the edge of a skinning knife, promising a winter that would kill anything left exposed. It scoured the high plains, finding the one lonely building for miles Sledge's trading post, a squat structure of sod and raw timber that huddled against a low rise, looking more like a scar on the land than a refuge from it. The wind was the reason the wagon train had stopped. It was the last one of the season, a ragged collection of canvas and misery pulled by mules whose ribs showed even through their thick winter coats. This was not a train of settlers. It was a cargo train, and its primary cargo was human. The sign crudely painted on the lead wagon read, "Mercantile Contracts and Labor," but everyone knew it by its real name. It was the bride train. It had arrived just ahead of the first heavy snows, and the men of the high country had gathered. They drifted in from coulees and high pastures, men who smelled of pine tar, stale whiskey, and animals. They were trappers, prospectors, and ranchers from outfits so remote that the sight of a new face was a major event. Now, they milled around the muddy yard of the post, their eyes fixed on the small group of women huddled by the wagon wheels. The air was thick with the clink of coin, pipe smoke, and a heavy, appraising silence. This was an auction, plain and simple. They were here to buy winter labor, a woman to cook and mend and warm a bed through the long, frozen dark. Among the women, one stood apart, not by choice, but because the others seemed to instinctively shun the particular brand of misery she wore. Her name was Lorna Harris. She was 22 years old, though the map of exhaustion and old bruises on her face made her look years older. She was small, fine-boned, with hair the color of dead straw. Her dress, a thin calico, was torn at the shoulder, revealing a dark purple mark on her skin. But it was her eyes that held the real story. They were gray, and the lights inside them had been turned out. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the bottom of things and had not bothered to climb back up. Whispers had followed her from Kansas, rumors of a homestead, a fire, and something involving a cavalry spade. She did not hear the whispers. She did not seem to hear anything at all. Standing in the deep shadow of the post's overhang, a man watched. He was tall, built with the kind of broad-shouldered power that comes from heavy, repetitive work. His name was Eli Mercer. Half of his face was a geography of old pain, a puckered, shiny map of scar tissue from a burn that had pulled one eye slightly wider than the other. He ran a hog ranch in a valley 2 days' ride from here, a place most men avoided. He was a quiet man, his words as scarce as his comforts. When he moved, he favored one leg, a slight drag that was not just a limp, but a haunting. It was the shadow of a war that had ended years ago but had never left him. The man orchestrating this miserable theater was Sledge, the post owner. He was a round man with a smooth talking voice and hands that were never still, always wiping themselves on his greasy apron. He moved among the men, clapping shoulders, his laugh too quick, too oily. Sledge was the living embodiment of the territory's loose laws. He would trade anything to anyone, no questions asked. He would sell whiskey to an apostolic preacher or a rifle to a man with murder in his eyes. It was all just business. He would have sold his own soul. Sledge would, if anyone had been willing to meet his price. The tension in the yard tightened as the sun began to dip, painting the clouds in bloody streaks. The cold was deepening. That was the real auctioneer. Winter. Nature itself was the vice, squeezing every soul present, forcing them into compromises they would have to live with or die from. The sky promised a blizzard by nightfall, and the need for shelter, for a warm body, for anything other than being alone, became a raw, physical ache. This was the business of the frontier, a place where morality was a luxury that few could afford. Everyone here, from Sledge to the lowest trapper, knew they were participating in a person auction. They knew these women were not contractors, but property, sold for a term of service that often ended only with the grave, but they called it hiring or securing a contract, because it made the swallowing of the act easier. It was a lie they all agreed upon, a thin coat of paint on a rotten plank. Sledge finally clapped his hands, the sound startlingly loud in the cold air. "All right, gentlemen, the weather waits for no man, and neither do these fine, hard-working ladies. Let's find some good homes for the winter." One by one, he brought the women forward. They wept, or they stared at their feet, or they tried a desperate, broken smile. The men bid in dollars, in pelts, in IOUs. Then it was Lorna's turn. Sledge gave her a little shove into the clearer space by the fire. "Now this one," he began, his voice taking on its familiar salesman's cadence. "This here is Lorna Harris, a hard worker from Kansas. Gentleman, quiet, biddable, 22 years old and knows her duties. What am I offered for her winter contract?" Lorna Harris stood in the circle of firelight. The wind whipped her thin hair across her face, but she did not raise a hand to brush it away. She did not flinch from the hungry, assessing stares of the men. She did not plead, nor did she offer any sign of resistance. She simply stood there, a small, bruised vessel, empty of hope. Her gaze was not on them. It was focused somewhere beyond them, past the wagons, past the darkening plains, fixed on the distant gray cliffs that were now just a silhouette against the dying light. She was looking right through them. The bidding was sluggish. The whispers about Kansas had done their work. Men wanted a worker. Yes, but not a ghost, not one who might bring trouble. $20, a trapper muttered, spitting tobacco into the mud. 25, another called, this one already drunk. Sledge's smile faltered. He was about to speak again, to extol her virtues, when the crowd shifted. Eli Mercer had moved. He stepped out of the shadows and into the edge of the firelight. He did not speak. He did not look at Sledge or the other men. His one good eye, and the scarred one, were fixed on Lorna. The crowd went silent. The presence of Eli Mercer was enough to chill the air more than the wind. He was not a man to be crossed. "Well, Mr. Mercer," Sledge said, his voice losing its oil, becoming cautious. "A late arrival to the festivities? Are you placing a bid for the girl?" Eli Mercer did not reach for a purse. His hand, scarred and large, went to the button of his heavy coat. He undid it slowly. He reached inside. The drunk, who had bid $25, took an involuntary step back, suddenly sober. Eli's hand emerged. He did not hold silver or a wad of bills. He held a small tin star, a United States Marshal's badge. It was dark with old blood. The metal bent. He did not offer it. He did not present it. He simply opened his fingers. The badge dropped. It fell into the wet. Boot-churned mud right at Sledge's feet. It spun once, the firelight catching the dark stain, and then lay still. The wind howled, filling the sudden, absolute silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The message was as clear as a rifle shot. This was not a bid. It was a claim. The bloody badge was a currency that trumped all others. It was a history that warned against questions. It was a ghost story told in a single, spinning piece of tin. "Don't ask. Don't count." Sledge's face, moments before slick with salesman's charm, went the color of spoiled lard. His eyes were fixed on the bloody tin star in the mud. The wind was the only thing that dared to make a sound. The circle of hard men who had been pressing in now did the opposite. They did not just step back, they flowed away from Eli Mercer, a human tide receding from a reef of jagged rock. It was not respect that moved them. It was a cold, practical fear. They knew Mercer, or rather, they knew of him. They knew the valley he kept, and they knew that he, like the valley, was best left alone. Sledge finally bent, his knees cracking. His plump hand, which had been so eager to count coin, hesitated over the badge. He licked his lips. Then, quickly, like snatching a coal from a fire, he plucked the star from the mud. He wiped it on his already filthy apron, the smear of mud and old blood just blending in. He shoved the badge deep into his pocket. He straightened up and would not meet Eli's eyes. He looked at Lorna instead, his gaze flat, all the false warmth gone. Sold, Sledge announced to the night air. The contract is sold to Mercer. Lorna stood frozen. She had been bought and sold before, but this was different. This was not a transaction. It was an execution. She braced herself for the hand that would grab her, the shove that would send her sprawling toward her new master. Eli Mercer did not move toward her. He stood by the fire, the flames casting huge, leaping shadows that clung to his tall frame. He watched her for another long moment. Then, with a slow deliberation, he unfastened the heavy buttons of his sheepskin coat. It was a massive thing, stained with salt and grease, built for winters that killed. He shrugged his shoulders, and the coat slid from his back. He held it by the collar. He walked toward her. Lorna flinched, her hands coming up in a pathetic, useless gesture of defense. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. It did not come. Instead, a great weight settled onto her shoulders, and with it, a wave of impossible, suffocating warmth. She opened her eyes. He had draped the coat over her. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging a foot past her fingertips, the hem dragging in the mud. It smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and him. He had not touched her skin. His scarred hand had released the coat, and he had already stepped back. He turned to Sledge. "My horse, and one for her. Now, Mercer," Sledge began, trying to find his footing. "The badge covers the contract, but a horse!" Eli Mercer simply looked at him. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Sledge's protest died in his throat. "Jed," he barked toward the barn. "Saddle Mr. Mercer's gelding, and the dun mare, now!" The journey was a silent eternity. Eli retrieved his rifle from the post, tied a small sack of provisions to his saddle, and mounted in one fluid motion. He led the dun mare to the wagon, where Lorna stood drowning in the coat. "Can you ride?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together. She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. He gestured with his chin. "Then ride." She put a foot in the stirrup, her limbs shaking so badly from cold and fear that she could get no purchase. She tried again, and failed. A sound of frustration, tiny and broken, escaped her. Before she could try a third time, his hand was on her back. It was not a hand. It was a forge, hot, hard, and impersonal. It did not stroke. It did not linger. It simply lifted. She found herself airborne, then settled hard into the cold saddle. He was back on his own horse before she had even found the other stirrup. He kicked his horse into a walk, heading west, away from the post, away from the one pinprick of light on the plains. He did not look back to see if she followed. He knew she would. She followed. The mare, sensing the rider's terror, was skittish, but the animal was too cold and tired to fight. It fell in behind Mercer's horse. They rode into the teeth of the wind. The snow had begun, not as flakes, but as tiny, hard pellets that stung her face and gathered in the folds of the heavy coat. There were two horses, and two straight backs. They rode like statues. The only movement, the plodding of the hooves and the swirl of the strengthening blizzard. He set a hard pace, never slowing. He navigated the dark, broken land as if it were broad daylight. He seemed to be following a trail only he could see. Lorna's world shrank to the gray tail of the horse in front of her and the agonizing burn of the cold in her lungs. They rode for hours. The land began to change, rising from flat plains into broken foothills, then into the mouths of canyons, the world, which had been vast and terrifying, now became close and suffocating. The rock walls rose on either side, blacker than the sky, channeling the wind until it shrieked. She did not know why he had bought her. She did not know where he was taking her. She did not ask. He did not speak. Just when Lorna thought she would simply freeze solid and tumble from the saddle, he stopped. He had pulled up at the end of a narrow box canyon. The place was a tomb. The ranch, if one could call it that, was a declaration of war against hope. A small cabin, built of cottonwood and mud, leaned against the canyon wall as if for support. Its roof was patched with rusted tin and raw hides. 100 yards away, a barn or shed had simply given up. Its roof had collapsed inward, its bones sticking up through a drift of old snow. There was no corral, just a few pigs in a crude enclosure, huddled together for warmth. A pair of skeletal mules stood in the lee of the cabin, their heads low. The entire place felt not just empty, but haunted. He dismounted and walked to the cabin door, the drag in his leg more pronounced in the cold. He shoved the door open. A square of dim, orange light fell onto the new snow. He had left a fire burning. He looked back at her. "Get down!" She slid from the horse, her legs buckling. She fell to her knees in the snow. The coat was so heavy she struggled to rise. He watched her. He did not offer a hand. He waited until she had pulled herself up, her entire body a single, shaking nerve, and stumbled past him into the cabin. He followed her inside, leading both horses to the small, attached lean-to that served as a stable. She heard him moving, unsaddling the animals, giving them a meager portion of hay. She stood in the center of the one room. It was barely warmer inside than out. A small, smoky fire struggled in a fireplace made of river stones. The room contained a rough table, one chair, and a narrow cot built into the wall, layered with furs. The floor was packed earth. He came back in, shaking the snow from his hat. He kicked the door shut, dropping a thick wooden bar into place. The sound of the bar sliding home was a punctuation mark, the end of a sentence. He walked to the fire, added a piece of wood from the small pile beside it, and poked it with a stick. Lorna had not moved. She was still by the door, the coat puddling around her feet. He turned, the firelight catching the ruined side of his face. He looked at the cot, then at her. "Your bed," he said. He pointed to the fire. "My fire." He gestured to a wooden bucket by the door. "Water's low. Snow tonight." And that was all. It was not a welcome. It was not a threat. It was a statement of facts. He was laying out the laws of his small, cold kingdom. Short, clipped, and final. Was he telling her to keep her distance, or was he giving her the only comfort he possessed? She could not tell. He took a tin cup, dipped it in the water bucket, and drank. Then he sat in the single chair by the fire, his back to her, and began to disassembling his rifle. Night fell. The snow did not stop. The wind hit the cabin, and the walls groaned. The sound was constant, a high, thin scream that drilled into her skull. Lorna had shed the coat, folding it neatly. She sat on the edge of the cot. She did not lie down. She did not undress. She waited. This was the part she knew. She had learned the script by heart in Kansas. First came the transaction. Then came the pretense of civilization, the rules, the sharing of a roof. Then came the whiskey, or just the silence. And then the man would turn, his eyes different, and the payment would be collected in full. The hand that had offered warmth would become a fist. The voice that had given orders would become a snarl. She waited for him to turn. She listened to every sound, the snap of the fire, the metallic click of the rifle bolt sliding home, the scuff of his boot on the dirt floor. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to absorb the inevitable, to make herself small and silent and survive it. She waited for hours. He finished with the rifle. He set it against the wall. He did not get a bottle. He sat and he stared into the flames. He did not look at her. He did not speak to her. He did not seem to acknowledge she was there at all. The night wore on. The cold in the room deepened. He never turned. The strange hand. The violent hand. The hand she had been preparing for since she saw the badge. Never came. A new fear began to creep into her, colder than the wind. The men she had known, they were simple creatures. Their rages were predictable. Their desires were obvious. A man who hit you, a man who took you. She knew how to navigate that. She knew the rules of that cruel game. This man was terrifying. He bought her with a symbol of death. He wrapped her in his own warmth. He gave her the bed. And then he did nothing. He was a void. He was a locked door. She could not guess what he wanted. A man who wanted nothing was the most dangerous man of all, because his desires, when they finally surfaced, would be things she could not possibly imagine. He was not a brute. He was something else. Her exhaustion finally won. She lay down on the cot, still in her dress, and pulled a single fur over her. She did not sleep. She watched the unmoving shape of his back. When the first gray light of the storm filtered through the one small, oiled paper window, she saw the cabin properly for the first time, and the fear solidified. In the wall, just above the table, was a hole. It was a bullet hole, fired from inside the room, angled toward the door. It had been patched with mud, but the patch had crumbled, leaving a dark, accusing eye. And on the floorboards, near the fireplace where he now sat, was a stain. It was dark brown, almost black, and had soaked deep into the wood. Someone had tried to scrub it out, had taken a knife to it, but they had only succeeded in splintering the wood, making the stain a part of the grain. This house knew things. This house had seen a violence far beyond a simple slap. This was a house where guns were fired and blood was spilled. Her eyes traveled from the stain to the bullet hole, and then to a corner of the room she had not noticed in the dark. There was another door, a low, thick door, set almost into the floor. A cellar door. It was made of heavy, axe-hewn planks, and it was locked. A single, massive padlock. Its iron body, eaten with rust, held a thick hasp in place. Lorna looked at the locked door. She looked at the blood stain. She looked at the man by the fire. He was asleep, sitting up in the chair, his scarred face slack, the rifle across his lap. A terrible certainty clicked into place in her mind, sharp and cold as the padlock itself. She had spent the night waiting for the familiar cruelty of a fist. She had been wrong. This man's secrets were not on the surface. They were kept under the floor. She had been a fool. The thing worse than a man's hand was what he kept hidden. And this silent, scarred man, in his tomb of a cabin, was hiding something terrible behind that locked door. The storm was not a storm. It was a war. It fell on the canyon not as snow but as a solid wall of white, and it did not stop for 3 days. The world vanished. The leaning cabin became a tiny, fragile drum, and the wind was a giant beating it with a screaming, relentless rhythm. The sound did not stop. It was a high, thin wail that clawed at the edges of the door and shrieked down the chimney, filling the small room with the sound of 1,000 ghosts. Time blurred into one long, gray twilight. The meager pile of wood Eli had stacked by the hearth shrank with terrifying speed. The cold was a physical thing, a presence that sat between them. It found its way through the chinks in the mud walls and seeped up from the packed earth floor. The hunger came. 2. Their supplies, meant for 1 man, were now stretched thin for 2. They ate boiled beans, and then just boiled water with a sliver of salt pork for flavor. The hunger and the wind became a 2-headed beast, chewing at their nerves, leaving them raw and exposed. Lorna began to work. She did not work because she was told to. She worked because to sit still was to let the fear win. The fear of the storm, and the deeper, colder fear of the man who sat in the room with her. She swept the dirt floor with a broom of bound twigs. She found a pail and scrubbed the one table until the wood was pale. She took a needle and a spool of black thread from a small tin box and mended the tear in his shirt, her stitches small and tight. She learned the fire, how to feed it small pieces of the precious wood. how to bank the coals at night to keep a spark of life alive until morning. Eli Mercer watched her. He rarely spoke. He sat in the one chair by the fire, cleaning his weapons. He had a rifle, the heavy repeater, and a pistol, a big cavalry model. His large, scarred hands were surprisingly deft. He oiled the metal, checked the mechanisms, polished the barrels. The sounds filled the cabin, the click of a cylinder turning, the oiled whisper of a rag, the snap of a breech closing. The constant, methodical care of his guns was its own kind of threat. It was the only conversation he seemed interested in having. Lorna's certainty about the locked cellar door grew. Her fear was a living thing, and it needed to be fed. She found what it was looking for on the second day. She had been searching for a rag under the cot, and her hand brushed against a long, narrow wooden box. It was not locked. She pulled it out. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, were tools. They were not the rough tools of a rancher or a carpenter. They were slender, polished steel. There were thin, sharp knives of various sizes, a set of clamps, several long needles, and a small saw with fine, serrated teeth. Lorna's blood went cold. She had seen tools like these once before, when a traveling doctor had come through Kansas and set a neighbor's leg. They were surgical tools, or butcher's tools. Her mind, trained by years of violence, made the leap instantly. The blood stain on the floor, the bullet hole, the locked cellar door. And now, these instruments. The men she had known used their fists, or a belt. This man was different. The realization was a cold, sharp spike in her chest. He was not a simple brute. He was a monster of a different, more terrible kind. The reason he had not touched her, the reason he had been so quiet, was not kindness. It was patience. He was waiting. The logic of a victim is built from the hardest materials. It is a fortress built of pain, and it sees every new thing as a stone for its walls. Her conclusion was absolute. He was a cutter, a man who practiced some dark, unspeakable art in the cellar he kept locked. On the morning of the fourth day, the world was born again. The wind stopped. The silence was as stunning as the noise had been. When Lorna looked out the small, dirty window, she was blind. The snow was a smooth, brilliant white, waist-deep, unbroken. Eli pulled on his boots and the heavy sheepskin coat. He took his rifle and went out, his body a dark shape against the blinding white. He was gone for a long time. Lorna watched him, a knot of dread in her stomach. He was moving toward the ruined barn, wading through the heavy drifts. He disappeared inside. He did not come out. The silence from the barn stretched on. Lorna, pressed by a curiosity that was stronger than her fear, pulled her own thin shawl tight around her shoulders. She opened the cabin door. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath. She pushed her way through the snow, her legs burning, her skirt soaked and heavy. She reached the lee of the collapsed barn. The wind had sculpted the drift here, leaving a path almost clear to the opening. She peered inside. The light was gray, filtered through the snow piled on the broken roof. Eli was kneeling in the frozen straw. At his feet was a dark, still shape, a calf, born in the heart of the blizzard, dead before it had ever stood. It was impossible. He was not cleaning a gun. His hands were braced on his knees, and his broad back was shaking. He was making no sound, but she could see the tremors that ran through him. He was weeping. He knelt there, a big scarred man, crying silently over the body of a dead calf. Lorna stopped. She could not move. This one simple act of grief tore a hole through her carefully constructed fortress of fear. A man who wept for a lost animal did not fit the image of the monster with the surgical tools. The two realities could not exist in the same man. Her certainty, which had been so absolute moments before, shattered into 1,000 confused pieces. He finally scrubbed a sleeve across his face, his back still to her. He had not heard her. She stepped forward. A piece of frozen straw snapped under her boot. He did not startle, but his whole body went rigid. He did not turn. She watched him, his shoulders still hunched in grief. Without thinking, she unwrapped the thin wool shawl from her own shoulders. It was the only thing of value she owned. She stepped forward, her hand trembling, and held it out. He did not move. She took one more step, her heart hammering, and gently laid the shawl over his broad, shaking shoulders. Her fingertips brushed the rough collar of his shirt. It was a touch as light as ash, gone in an instant. It was the first time they had touched as anything other than jailer and prisoner, force and victim. He froze, his breath hitching. His scarred hand came up, slow and hesitant, and his fingers closed over the thin wool, gripping it. He did not turn. He did not speak. Lorna, suddenly terrified by her own boldness, turned and fled back to the cabin, pushing through the snow, her heart shouting in her ears. That night, the cold returned, and it brought visitors. The howling began just after dark. It was not the high, thin sound of the wind. It was a chorus of low, hungry moans, rising and falling. Wolves. They were close. Eli was on his feet instantly, his rifle in his hand. He moved to the door, listening. The sound came again. Closer. Then, a new sound, a horse's scream. It was a high, terrible sound of pure panic and pain. Cut short, it was followed by a frenzy of snarls and growls. Eli let out a low, vicious curse. He peered through a crack in the door, but it was useless. He barred the door, his face a mask of grim fury. "Wolves," he said, his voice flat. "They got the mare." Lorna's stomach tightened. The dun mare, the one she had ridden. Another loss, another mouth gone. The ranch, this fragile, dying place, had just lost another piece of its lifeblood. She looked at him, standing by the door, and she saw a man being buried, slide by slide, under the weight of failure. He turned from the door and stood by the dying fire. Staring into the coals, the loss of the horse seemed to drain the last of the life from him. Lorna watched him. Her old world, the one she understood, reasserted itself. She knew this man. He was a man with nothing, who had paid for something, and now that something was another burden. The calf was dead. The horse was dead. And she was here. Another mouth to feed. Another bad investment. She understood. This was a debt, and she knew how it must be paid. She stood up from the cot. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. "Mr. Mercer." Her voice was a whisper. He turned, his scarred face unreadable in the dim light. "I will pay my debt," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. This was a calculation, a grim piece of arithmetic. She reached for the top button of her dress. Her fingers were clumsy, numb. He watched her, his expression shifting from bleakness to a dark confusion. "What?" "What are you doing?" he growled. "My contract," she said, her fingers finally freeing the first button. "The horse is gone. The food is low. I have to—" "No." The word was an explosion. It was not a shout. It was a roar of such sudden, unexpected violence that she recoiled as if he had struck her. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her face, a small cry of terror escaping her. He took one step toward her, his face transformed. It was a mask of pure, murderous rage, but beneath it, something else, a deep, agonizing pain. "Not ever," he bit out, his voice a snarl. He was shaking. "You do not pay me, not like that. Put your hands down." She was frozen, weeping in terror. This was the violence, but it was wrong. It was all wrong. He was not angry that she refused. He was angry that she offered. It was a denial of her entire world. He stopped, seeing her terror. He seemed to fight himself. He turned his back on her and slammed his fist against the stone of the chimney. The sound was a dull, heavy thud. "Go to bed," he ordered, his voice raw. She scrambled onto the cot, pulling the furs over her head, and curled into a tight ball. She shook, trying to muffle her sobs. Eventually, exhaustion and terror pulled her under, into a sleep that was not rest, but a different kind of darkness. Kansas found her there, the smell of whiskey and oil, the sound of boots on a wood floor, the glint of a button in the lamplight, a heavy hand. She screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, primal shriek of pure, undiluted terror that tore out of her throat. She woke herself, sitting bolt upright in the dark, the scream still ripping from her lungs. He was there. He had crossed the room in an instant, moving like a cat, reacting to the sound. He was still half asleep, driven by pure, animal instinct. His large, scarred hand clamped down hard on her shoulder, to hold her, to silence the noise. The touch was the nightmare made real. It was the hand from her dream. Her mind broke. She did not see Eli. She saw the other men. She howled, a long, animal sound, and threw herself backward, clawing at his hand. She fell off the cot, scrambling away from him, pulling the furs with her. She crab-walked backward until she hit the far wall, where she huddled, gasping, her eyes white and wide, trapped in a terror that was years old. Eli froze. He stood over the empty cot, his hand outstretched, still clenched from the grab. He looked at his own hand as if it were a snake. He looked at her, a small, broken thing huddled by the woodpile, hyperventilating. He began, his voice rough. He pulled his hand back, flexing it. I was stopping the noise. The screaming? She just gasped, dry, rattling sobs. He stood in the middle of the room, the space between them a vast, frozen lake. He looked at her, and the anger, the confusion, all of it drained away, leaving only that dead, empty shadow she had seen in the barn. He did that? She finally choked out, the words tearing her throat. She was speaking to the floor. He grabbed me. When I made noise, he grabbed me. Before... Eli's face hardened. He looked at the floor, at his own boots. He seemed to come to a decision. He turned his back to her. They did this to me, he said, his voice quiet, rough. He unbuttoned his shirt. He shrugged it from his shoulders, letting it fall to the dirt floor. Lorna's sobbing stopped. She looked up. In the dim, flickering light from the fire, she saw his back. It was a ruin, a landscape of old, white scars, thick and raised. They crisscrossed, overlapping, from his shoulders down to his waist. They were whip marks, old and deep. Andersonville, he said. The name of the prison camp hung in the dark air. A complete explanation. They liked to make noise, too. He stood there, his back to her, exposed. He was offering his own brokenness as a bridge. He was trading his scars for hers. She stared, the terror in her chest, the high, thin scream of panic, finally began to recede. Kansas, she whispered, her voice broken. My stepfather, he had the contract. He sold me to some cavalrymen for whiskey. When they were done, I found the knife in the kitchen. She stopped. Eli slowly bent and picked up his shirt. He did not ask her to finish. He did not need to. He slid the shirt back on, his movement stiff. He turned, and the silence in the room was different. It was not empty. It was full of the two truths they had laid on the floor. The fire was almost out. The cabin was now lethally cold. The wind was still screaming. He looked at her, still huddled by the wall. He looked at the narrow cot. You'll freeze there, he said. She did not move. He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He walked to the fire, added the last two small logs. Come to the fire. It is the only warmth. She shook her head, a small, trembling motion. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he took the fur from his own chair and laid it on the cot. He lay down on top of it, on the very edge, his back to the room. Take the furs, he said, his voice muffled. Get on the cot. I will not touch you. She watched him. He was a large man. He took up half the bed, but he was turned away, a solid, unmoving shape. Slowly, her limbs stiff and aching. She crawled from her corner. She climbed onto the very edge of the cot, keeping a foot of space between them. She pulled the heavy, greasy sheepskin coat over both of them. They lay there, two parallel lines of misery, not touching, but sharing the same small, fragile shelter against the storm. The cold was relentless. After an hour, she was shaking so violently her teeth were chattering. He spoke, his voice so low she almost missed it. "You can get closer, just for the heat. I mean it." She hesitated. Then, an inch at a time, she shifted, until her back was pressed against the solid wall of his. He was a furnace. The shaking began to subside. It was the first time she had ever felt human warmth without terror. They lay like that, back to back, listening to the wind try to kill them, just before the gray light of dawn, as she finally slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep. She heard him whisper, so low she thought she might have imagined it. "When you want," he said. "You give, not before, not for debt." The thaw began not as a movement, but as a sound. It was the sound of dripping. Water, released from the ice on the eaves, began to fall onto the hard-packed snow below. Drip, drip, drip. It was a small, insistent clock, measuring the end of their confinement. The great screaming wind had been replaced by this tiny, maddening percussion. Inside the cabin, the air had changed. The truce of the shared bed, that desperate huddle for warmth against the killing cold, had ended when the storm broke. Lorna had moved back to the cot. Eli had returned to his chair by the fire. But the space between them was no longer a simple void of fear. It was charged with a new, agonizing awkwardness. They had shared truths in the dark. He had shown her his scars. She had confessed her own violence. They had slept back to back, his warmth a solid wall against the night. Now, in the gray daylight, they could not meet each other's eyes. When they did, by accident, the glance held for a fraction of a second too long, full of questions neither knew how to ask. The ice outside was breaking, but the ice between them, while cracked, remained thick and perilous. The food was gone. The last of the beans had been boiled. The last strip of salt pork eaten. The hunger, held at bay by the crisis of the storm, returned with a sharp edge. Eli stood and pulled his heavy coat from the peg. He checked his rifle, his movements economical and precise. He looked at Lorna. "I will hunt," he said. It was a simple statement, but it was the first thing he had said to her all morning. "The snow is deep," she replied, her voice small. "We eat, or we do not," he said. He opened the door, letting in a blast of cold, damp air, and stepped out into the blinding white. He did not look back. Lorna was alone. The silence in the cabin was heavier than his presence. It was just her, the dripping water, and the locked cellar door. She went about her small chores. She rebuilt the fire, swept the floor, straightened the furs on the cot, but her mind was unsettled. He had not hurt her. He had stopped her from paying a debt she thought was owed. He had shown her his own wounds. He had given her his warmth, a gift with no price attached, a feeling she could not name, a strange, tight knot in her chest, demanded to be let out. It was gratitude, but it was a rusted, stiff emotion she was not practiced in using. She felt a desperate need to say something, to mark the change, but she could not speak it. She looked around the cabin. Her eyes landed on a smooth, pale piece of bark Eli used for kindling. She picked it up. She found a small piece of charcoal by the hearth. Her hand, she noted with a distant sense of frustration, was shaking. She gripped her right wrist with her left hand to steady it. Slowly, in a small, cramped script, she wrote on the bark. It was only 2 words. "Thank you." She set the bark on the table where he would see it. She stared at what she had written. "Thank you." And the old, cold logic returned. Sharp as a serpent's tooth. Why had he been kind? Why had he shared his bed and his past? Only to ask for nothing. The men she knew did not give kindness for free. Kindness was a tool. It was a lever used to pry open a lock. It was a sweet poison given before the blade. It was a more patient, more cruel way of trapping. Her eyes darted to the box of surgical tools under the cot. Her stomach clenched, her gaze fixed on the heavy, rusted padlock on the cellar door. He had not hit her. He had not forced her. He was waiting. He was being gentle. He was feeding her. He was earning her trust. He was luring her into a sense of safety. And when she was finally, fully broken to his hand, when she was docile and trusting, then he would open that door. The terror that flooded her was worse than any she had felt during the storm. This was not the fear of a simple brute. This was the fear of a calculating, patient monster. She had to leave. She had to run. Now. While he was gone. She did not take the coat. She did not take food. She tore the cabin door open and plunged out into the snow. She ran. She did not know where she was going. She just ran, her legs burning, her lungs on fire. She pushed through the high drifts, following the canyon wall, scrambling over rocks slick with new ice. She ran until her breath was a raw, tearing sob. She finally stumbled and fell into a hollow, out of the wind. It was a place where the snow was shallower. She looked down and saw she was standing on a foundation, blackened stones, the remnants of a chimney, stuck up from the snow. It was the ruins of another building, a place that had been consumed by fire. She huddled behind the chimney stones, gasping, shaking. She was freezing. Her dress was soaked. She had run, but she had nowhere to go. She was trapped in the canyon, trapped by the snow. And she had just fled the only fire for miles. She was a fool. But the fear of the cabin, of his kindness, was greater than the fear of the cold. Eli returned 2 hours later, a pair of rabbits tied to his belt. He entered the cabin and knew, instantly, that she was gone. The air was dead. He saw the piece of bark on the table. He picked it up. Thank you. A strange, tight feeling, not unlike the one she had felt, flickered in his own chest. He ran his rough thumb over the charcoal letters. Then he turned the bark over. She had written something on the other side, but I do not belong to anyone. He read the words twice. The warmth in his chest turned cold. This was not a note of gratitude. It was a goodbye. It was a rejection. He went to the door. He was not a tracker of men by trade, but he knew the land. The snow made it easy. He saw her panicked, stumbling footprints leading up from the cabin, following the canyon wall. He let out a low, frustrated breath. He did not take his rifle. He just followed the tracks, his long legs moving with a slow, powerful stride. He found her huddled behind the burned chimney. She was a small, shivering bundle, her lips already blue. She was trying to make herself invisible. When she saw him, she let out a small, terrified cry and tried to scramble away. Her frozen skirt tangled, and she fell back into the snow. He did not speak. He walked to her, his shadow falling over her. She cringed, her hands flying up to protect her face. "Please," she whispered, the word lost in the wind. "Please do not." He stood over her. He looked at her, this small, broken thing that had chosen to freeze to death rather than stay in his home. He unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat. He did not drape it over her. He pushed it aside, in one swift, powerful motion. He bent and scooped her off the ground. He lifted her high against his chest. His arm was a steel band around her back, his other hand beneath her knees. The sudden, hard contact, the sheer, bruising strength of his grip, was a violation. It was the thing she had been running from. A low moan tore from her throat. She thrashed, her small, cold fists beating weakly against his chest. "You are hurting me," she gasped. The words choked with terror and pain. He stopped. He stood still in the snow, holding her. He looked down at her face, which was white with panic. He looked at his own arm, locked around her like a trap. He realized his grip was brutal. He had not meant it to be. He had simply acted. His scarred face tightened. He looked away from her, up at the gray canyon walls. His voice, when it came, was a raw, hoarse whisper, heavy with something she could not understand. "It is the only force I know." The words fell between them, as heavy and cold as the stones of the burned foundation. It was not an excuse. It was a confession. It was an apology from a man who did not know the language of gentle things. His arm did not release her, but the crushing, steel band of it loosened. Just enough. It was still a capture, but it was no longer a cage. She stopped thrashing. She was too cold, too tired. She lay limp in his arms as he turned and began the long walk back to the cabin. He did not set her down when they arrived. He kicked the door shut with his boot and carried her straight to the cot. He placed her on the furs, not gently, but with a new, deliberate care. He turned, his back to her, and rebuilt the fire until it roared, stuffing wood into it with a controlled anger. He did not speak to her. He did not lecture her for running. He did not demand to know why. He took the rabbits and, with his back still to her, he skinned and cleaned them with swift, economical motions. He spitted the meat and set it over the fire. The cabin filled with the smell of roasting meat. It was a rich, life-affirming smell that cut through the cold and the fear. Lorna watched him. He was a broad, silent man, tending a fire, his scarred hands now busy with cooking. He had not punished her. He had not yelled. He had simply brought her back from the cold. When the meat was cooked, he pulled it from the spit, laid it on a tin plate, and brought it to her. He did not hand it to her. He set it on the cot beside her. "Eat," he said. He went back to his chair and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always simmering by the coals. He sat, and he watched her. She ate. Her hands shook, but she ate. The hot meat was a shock to her cold body. It was life. She ate until the plate was clean. She set the plate aside. He said nothing. He just sipped his coffee, staring into the flames. The silence was different again. The fear was gone. The awkwardness was gone. All that was left was a deep, bone weariness, and the simple fact of the food. She sat up, pulling the damp furs around her. He got up from his chair and walked to the hearth to refill his cup. She found herself moving, too. She stood, her legs unsteady, and walked toward the fire, holding out her own tin cup. He took the pot from the coals. She held her cup. They both reached for the pot handle at the same time. Their hands brushed, his large, scarred fingers against the back of her small, cold ones. It was a jolt, sharp and hot, like a static spark. They both flinched, pulling their hands back as if burned. They looked at each other, really looked. For the first time, he was just a man, his face a map of old pain, his eyes full of a deep, abiding sadness. She was just a woman, her face bruised by more than the cold, her eyes holding a fear that was ancient. He did not look away. He held her gaze, and slowly, very slowly, he leaned toward her. He was giving her time. He was giving her all the time in the world to pull away, to scream, to run. She did not move. His lips touched hers. It was a disaster of a kiss. It was clumsy and rough. His lips were chapped, and hers were half frozen. It tasted of wood smoke, bitter coffee, and the salty tang of the roasted rabbit. But she did not pull back. She held her ground, her eyes wide open, watched his, and as he pulled away, she, in a motion so small he almost missed it, leaned into him. It was enough. He set the coffee pot down. He did not move. His eyes asked the question. She gave the answer. She put her cold hand, the one that had held the charcoal, on his chest. He took a breath, sharp and unsteady. His own hand, the one with the burn scars, came up. He did not touch her face. He touched her hair, his fingers barely grazing the damp, straw-colored strands. He was trembling. The realization struck her. He, this big, forceful man, was afraid. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of himself. He was afraid of the very force he had confessed to. That knowledge broke the last of her fear. She made the choice. She, Lorna Harris, who belonged to no one, gave. She put her other hand on his shoulder and stood on her toes, and this time, she kissed him. He received it, his body rigid, his hands shaking, as if he were holding a stick of dynamite. This time, it was slow. This time, it was a question and an answer, all in one. He lifted her. He did not scoop her or grab her. His hands were careful, one on her back, one under her legs. He lifted her as if she were made of thin, spun glass and carried her the 2 steps to the cot. He laid her down on the furs. He did not join her. He knelt by the side of the cot, his scarred face level with hers. His eyes asked, again, "Are you sure?" She did not speak. She reached up and put her hand against the unburned side of his face. She gave, and he, with hands that shook with the effort of being gentle, received. It was a slow, careful exploration, a mapping of boundaries. It was a conversation held not with words, but with hesitant touches, with pauses, with the constant check of his eyes on hers. For every move he made, he waited for her silent assent. For her, it was the discovery that a man's touch did not have to mean pain. For him, it was the revelation that tenderness was a force all its own, more powerful and more terrifying than anything he had ever known. After they lay in the tangle of furs, the fire had burned low. The cabin was quiet, save for the drip, drip, drip of the melting ice. The new vulnerability was a raw, exposed nerve. Lorna felt a new fear rise. It was not of him. He was lying on his back beside her, his breathing heavy, his eyes closed. It was the world. "Eli," she whispered. His eyes opened. "What if they find me?" she asked. "The old terror of Kansas returning. The men, what if they come looking for me?" He was silent for a long time. He turned his head and looked at her. Then he turned his gaze to the cabin door, to the thick wooden bar he had dropped into place. He did not say, "I will protect you." He did not make a promise, but she watched his face, and she saw the lines of it settle. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The shadow of the war, the ghost in his eyes, was suddenly replaced by the sharp, focused gaze of a soldier taking a post. The promise had been made. It had shifted. It was no longer just his, and it was no longer just hers. It was, for the first time, ours. The peace that followed was a fragile, brittle thing. It was a sheet of thin ice over a deep, black river. They moved around each other in the small cabin, the memory of the night before a third presence in the room. He was quieter, if that were possible. But his silence was different. It was no longer a void. It was a stillness, a waiting. She found herself watching his hands, the scarred one and the whole one, marveling at how they had been so careful. The fear of him, the monster she had built in her mind, had been burned away, leaving only this complex, damaged man. And in its place, the old fear, the one from Kansas, had returned, the fear of the outside world. They were eating the last of the rabbit, a silent, shared meal. When they heard it, it was not the wind, and it was not a wolf. It was the sound of a horse, moving fast, breaking the snow crust, splashing through the melt. It was the sound of panic. Eli was on his feet before the sound had even registered in her mind. He did not grab his rifle. He moved to the door, his body low, and listened. His face, which had been resting in a state of weary truce, became a mask. It was not anger, not fear. It was a complete, terrifying flatness, as if a pond had flash frozen, all emotion trapped beneath the surface. "Stay away from the window," he said, his voice low. The horse burst into the small yard, its sides heaving. The rider half fell, half threw himself from the saddle and pounded on the cabin door. "Mercer, Mercer, open up for God's sake." Eli recognized the voice. He lifted the bar. Jed Stone stumbled in. It was the man from Sledge's post, the one who had saddled the mare. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Jed," Eli said, his voice a flat wall. "Catch your breath. No time." Jed panted, grabbing Eli's coat. "Mercer, you have to run. You both have to run. He is here." Lorna felt her stomach turn to ice. She stood up from the cot. "Who is here?" Eli asked. His calm, a stark contrast to Jed's terror. "A hunter." Jed gasped. "A bounty man. He rode in last night. Not like the others. He is clean. His gun is clean. He..." He is not drinking. He is just asking questions. And he has a paper. Mercer, a wanted poster. Jed looked at her, and his eyes filled with a new, awful pity. He is looking for a woman, Jed said, his voice dropping. From Kansas. For murder. Her name is Lorna Harris. The name. Her name. Hung in the air of the cabin. It sounded like a death sentence. Sledge told him. Jed rushed on. Sledge said he did not know, but the man, this Ridge, he knows Sledge is lying. He is offering $200. Sledge will sell his own mother for that. Ridge is checking the livery, the store. He knows a woman came through here. He knows she did not leave. He is going to check the outlying ranches. He is starting with yours. Eli's face did not change. How long? He was saddling up when I left. I took the cut through the hills. An hour, maybe 2. He is a tracker. Mercer. They say he is the devil himself on a trail. You have to go. Take the horses. Go north into the high country. You can lose him in the passes. Eli looked at Jed. He put a hand on the smaller man's shoulder. You did a good thing. Jed, now you ride. You ride back. You did not see us. You were checking your trap lines. Mercer, you are not listening. Go, Eli said. The word was not loud, but it had the finality of a hammer blow. Jed looked at Eli's flat, dead eyes, and his protest died. He nodded, once, and scrambled out the door. They heard his horse gallop away, the sound of panic fading. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Lorna stood, her hands clenched at her sides. She was shaking, but not from cold. I will go, she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. Eli turned to look at her. I have to go, she said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. I will not have you die for me. This is my trouble. He is looking for me. She moved to grab the heavy sheepskin coat, his coat. No, he said. You cannot stop me. I will not be the reason. He moved, his body interposing itself between her and the door. You run, he said, his voice calm. He catches you. He is a tracker. This snow, it is a blank page, and you will write your whole story on it for him. You will last one day, maybe, and when he catches you, he will not just take you back. The quiet way he said it, the implication of what a man like that would do to a woman alone, was more terrifying than any shout. We stay, he said. He turned from the door. He was no longer a farmer, no longer a haunted man. He was a soldier. He walked to the table and calmly, methodically, began to lay out ammunition. He took cartridges from a box and set them in neat piles of 5. He checked the cylinder of his pistol. Lorna watched him, her mind numb. What are you doing? He will come here, Eli said, not looking up. He will follow Jed's tracks, or he will just come. This is the first place he will look. He went to the woodpile and picked up a piece of damp, green wood, half frozen. He laid it on the bright coals of the fire. Almost immediately, the cabin began to fill with a lazy, thick smoke, which poured up the chimney. A man alone, Eli said, builds a fast, hot fire. A man with family. He builds a slow one. For cooking, he will see the smoke. He will think we are settling in for the night. He was setting a trap. A domestic trap. Lorna's eyes went to the cellar door. The rusted padlock. The thing she had feared. He will search the cabin, she whispered. He will find me. He will look down there. Eli looked at the cellar door. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then he reached up to a nail, high on the chimney stones, a place she had never noticed, hidden in the shadows. He took down a single, rusted iron key. He walked to the door. He did not look at her. He inserted the key into the lock. It took his full, straining strength to turn it. The mechanism groaned, a shriek of rust and time, and the lock sprang open. He pulled the hasp free and lifted the heavy plank door. A wave of cold, damp air rose from the darkness, smelling of earth, of potatoes, of deep, still cold. It was not a dungeon. It was not a torture chamber. It was just a cellar. He lit the lantern that hung by the door and handed it to her. "Go down." She took it, her hands shaking. She peered down the steep, rickety ladder into the black square. What is it?" "It is a root cellar," he said. "The first house. The one that burned. This was the foundation. It is all that is left of it. It is a refuge for the living. Lorna, not the dead." She looked at him, his words a confirmation of a truth she was only just beginning to piece together. She descended, the lantern light pushing back the shadows. The cellar was small, the walls made of earth and stone. Shelves lined one wall, holding a few withered potatoes, some jars of preserves. In the far corner sat a small, wooden chest, its lid closed. Eli came down the ladder behind her, his bulk filling the small space. "This," she said, pointing to the chest. "It was hers," he said. His voice was tight, strained. "My wife's, Sarah's." Lorna knelt. She ran her fingers over the dust on the lid. She looked up at him, asking permission. He gave a single, sharp nod. She opened the chest. It was not full of secrets. It was full of life. A neatly folded quilt, a pair of tiny, knitted baby shoes, a pressed flower, and at the bottom, a small, leather-bound book. She lifted it out. It was a journal. She opened it. The handwriting was neat, round, a woman's hand. She read the first page, and the second. It was not a story of fear or hardship. It was a story of hope. May 10th, planted the corn today by the creek. Eli says it is good soil. May 12th. Eli finished the new chair. He says it is just wood, but it is strong. It is the first new thing we have had. June 1st. Saw a bluebird. I think it is a good sign. Lorna looked up at Eli. He was standing by the ladder, his face in shadow, only the ruined side of it catching the lantern light. She saw it all. The bullet hole in the wall upstairs, the blood stain by the fire. He had not been the cause of them. He had been the survivor. This was not his dungeon. It was his prison. He had been locked down here in his guilt, in his memory, for years. Her fingers turned the pages. She found the last entry. The handwriting was hurried, jagged. October 2nd. The men from the railroad camp are back. They are drunk. Eli has gone to the post for seed. I have barred the door. I can hear them outside. They burned it, he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. I came back. I was too late. The fire. She was still. He choked on the word. "The box," Lorna whispered, looking at the surgical tools she had found. "Under the cot. I was a field medic," he said, his eyes squeezed shut. "In the war. I tried to save her. The smoke. The burns. I tried. The tools were not for torture. They were for saving. And they had failed him." Lorna closed the journal. She held it out to him. She was not just the fire. Eli, she was the corn and the chair. He did not take it. He could not look at it. Lorna tore a blank page from the very back of the book. She tucked the journal back into the chest, among the baby shoes. "This," she said, holding the empty page, "is the past." And then she climbed the ladder, and he followed, his movements heavy, like a man sleepwalking. Upstairs in the cabin, she went to the fire. She laid the empty page on the new, smoky logs. They both watched it curl, brown at the edges, and then flare into a bright, quick ash. They were burning the blankness, the part that had not been written. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he looked at her, the ghost was gone from his eyes. The soldier was back. "He will be here soon," he said. He went to the wall and took down a second rifle, a smaller, lighter model. He checked it, then handed it to her. "Do you know how to use this?" She shook her head. In Kansas, I used a knife." His hands were on hers, showing her. They were not gentle, but they were not rough. They were efficient. "This is how you load. You pull this back. You look down this. You pull this. It will kick. Do not be afraid of it." The rifle was heavy in her hands. "You will not stay in the cellar," he said. "It is a trap. It is the first place he will look for someone weak. Where? The barn. In the loft. You can see the cabin door from there. He hurried her out, pulling his sheepskin coat over her shoulders. They moved through the snow, their tracks mingling. He led her into the ruined, cold barn. Up there, he said, pointing to the loft. Lie flat, in the hay. Do not move. Do not make a sound. You will be cold, but you will be alive. He helped her up the ladder. She settled into the shadows of the old hay, the rifle cold in her hands. He stood below her. He will come to the cabin. He will talk to me. You will hear us. He looked up at her, his scarred face grim, his eyes burning with a cold light. Lorna, you do not shoot. You do not make a sound. You shoot only when I shoot, not 1 second before. Do you understand? What if he... You shoot when I shoot, he commanded. She nodded, her whole body trembling. I understand. He turned and left her. She watched him walk back to the cabin, his long, sure strides. The door opened, and he disappeared inside. A moment later, she heard the sound, heavy and final, of the bar dropping into place. She was alone, in the cold, with a rifle, waiting for a man who had come to kill her. An hour passed. The sun began to bleed red into the west, painting the snow a pale, bloody pink. The cold was seeping into her, a deep, aching numbness. And then she heard it. A horse, a single horse, moving at a slow, confident walk. A man rode into the canyon. He was dressed in a fine, black coat. He sat on a beautiful black horse. He was lean, his hair was dark, and he moved with a fluid, easy grace. He stopped his horse 100 yards from the cabin. His name, she thought, was Silas Ridge. He did not move for a full 5 minutes. He just sat, a black statue against the red snow. He studied the cabin. He studied the smoke that curled from the chimney. He studied the tracks in the snow. His head turned, and she knew, with a certainty that made her heart stop, that he was looking right at the barn. She did art. Finally, he dismounted, his movements like a cat's. He left his horse and walked toward the cabin, his own rifle held loosely in the crook of his arm. He stopped 10 feet from the door. "Hello, the house," he called. His voice was beautiful. It was clear and smooth and carried easily on the cold air. It was the most dangerous sound she had ever heard. There was a scraping sound, and the cabin door opened. Eli stood in the doorway. He was not holding his rifle. He was holding a tin cup of coffee. He blocked the entire entrance. "Afternoon," Eli said. Silas Ridge smiled. It was a cold, bright smile that did not touch his eyes. His eyes were the color of ice. "Afternoon, friend. Just passing through. I smelled your cook fire. A man gets powerful lonely on the trail." "Does he?" Eli said. It was not a question. Ridge's smile widened. He nodded at the tangle of tracks in the snow. "Jed's horse, Eli's boots." "You live alone, friend." "Mostly," Eli said. Ridge's gaze dropped to the ground by the door, where the snow had melted, leaving a patch of mud. He pointed with his chin. "Those big boot prints, they are yours, I reckon." He gestured to a smaller, more delicate set of prints, frozen in the mud, half obscured by Eli's own, her prints, from when she had run. "But those," Ridge said, his voice soft, "those are not yours. Too small. And you've got 2 sets of tracks leading to the barn, and only one coming back. You are a busy man." The lie was broken. The domestic stage was shattered. Ridge laughed, a short, cold sound, like ice breaking. "It has been a long ride. Friend, I am looking for someone." He pulled a folded paper from his inside coat pocket. "A woman, name of Lorna Harris, from Kansas. You know. Why do we not talk about this inside? It is getting cold." His smile vanished. "We can talk about it over that supper you are cooking, after I see what is in your cellar." He took a step toward the door. Eli did not move. Silas Ridge did not move from the threshold. He stood with that cold, perfect smile, his icy eyes looking past Eli, into the cabin. His gaze settled on the heavy, plankboard door of the cellar, and the new, oiled hasp and the rusted, heavy padlock. "He will come to the cabin. He will talk to me," Eli had said, but he had been wrong. Ridge was not here to talk. He was here to collect. "She is down there, is she not?" Ridge's voice was soft, conversational, like a man discussing the weather. "Hiding in the dark. That is a pity." He looked at Eli, and the smile was gone, replaced by a flat, bored impatience. "I am a patient man, friend, but I am not that patient. I will take the girl. You can have the bounty, say, 30% for your trouble. Just open the door." "There is no one here," Eli said. His voice was a low growl. He was a mountain, blocking the entrance. "I see the prince, friend," Ridge said, sighing. "I see the lie on your face. Stand aside." Ridge took one step forward to push past. Eli did not move. The bounty hunter was fast. He was faster than any man Eli had ever seen. He was not trying to get to the cellar. He was ending the conversation. He did not draw his rifle. His hand blurred, disappearing inside his clean black coat and reappearing, holding a pistol. The shot was an explosion inside the small cabin. It was deafening. In the cold, dark earth below the floorboards, Lorna screamed. She had been crouched on the ladder, the small rifle in her hands, listening. The sound of the gunshot was a physical blow. Eli grunted, a sound of pure, surprised pain. The bullet tore through the thick muscle of his left shoulder. It spun him around like a child's toy. He crashed backward, his full weight splintering the small, rough-hewn table. It collapsed under him, a pile of kindling. He landed hard on the dirt floor, his head striking the leg of the cot. His rifle, which had been leaning by the wall, clattered into the far corner, swallowed by the shadows. Silas Ridge stepped into the cabin, the smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. He looked down at the large man, now a heap on the floor, bleeding. He clucked his tongue, a sound of mild annoyance. "That was foolish," he said. "Now my supper is ruined." He walked past Eli, not giving the wounded man a second glance. He was all business. He holstered his pistol and crouched by the cellar door. He examined the lock. My, he said, his voice light again. "A good, strong lock. He must not trust you very much, Miss Harris." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, metal tool. "No matter. Locks are just suggestions." He was fitting the tool into the rusted keyhole when a shadow fell over him. He looked up. Eli Mercer was on his feet. He was bleeding heavily from the shoulder, but he was standing. His face was not human. It was a mask of pure, white fury. The scarred side pulled tight, his eyes burning with a light that was older than the mountains. Ridge tried to stand, to draw his pistol again, but he was too late. Eli had been a medic, but before that, he had been a soldier. Eli lunged. He did not grab or tackle. He drove his good shoulder, his right shoulder, straight into Ridge's chest. The impact was a dull, wet thud, like an axe hitting soft wood. Ridge flew backward, slamming into the cabin wall, the breath driven from his body in a single, explosive gasp. Ridge was fast, though he was a cat. He did not try to fight the larger man. He scrambled, rolling, kicking at Eli's wounded leg. Eli roared, but Ridge was already up. He made for the open door, for the open air, for the rifle on his horse. Eli was on him. He grabbed the back of Ridge's fine black coat. The fabric ripped, but it was enough. He hauled him back. The fight spilled out of the cabin, into the muddy, snow-patched yard. It was not a fight. It was a mauling. Ridge was quick and technical, landing sharp, painful blows to Eli's ribs, to his wounded shoulder. Eli did not seem to feel them. He was a bear. He was all force. Ridge broke free and ran, Not for his horse, but for the only other cover available, the ruined barn. He plunged into the darkness of the stable. Eli followed him. It was dark inside, the only light coming from the gaps in the collapsed roof. The air was cold, full of the smell of moldy hay and the sharp tang of animal fear. The mules in the lean-to were kicking and screaming. Ridge scrambled backward, his fine boots slipping in the muck. His eyes were wide, the cold arrogance gone, replaced by a new, sharp fear. He had misjudged. He had thought he was hunting a farmer. He had found something else. He backed into the wall, his hands searching in the dark. They found a pitchfork, stuck in a pile of rotted straw. He grabbed it and thrust, all his strength behind it. "Stay back," he screamed. Eli tried to turn, but he was too close. The tines of the fork ripped through his coat, through his shirt, and gouged a long, bloody trench along his ribs. The pain was white-hot. Eli roared, a sound that was not human. He did not retreat. He advanced. He walked straight into the pitchfork, grabbing the wooden handle with his bloody hands. He ripped it from Ridge's grasp and threw it aside. He was inside. Ridge had no more weapons. Eli hit him. Once, a huge, open-handed blow to the side of the head. Ridge's ears rang, and he stumbled. Eli grabbed him, pinning him against the rough wood of a horse stall. Ridge tried to knee him, but Eli was a wall of muscle and rage. Eli drove his own heavy knee up, not into the groin, but into Ridge's chest, just below the ribs. There was a sound, a wet, sickening crack. Ridge screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut off as his lungs collapsed. A broken rib. He slumped, all the fight gone, the air stolen from him. Eli's hands, the scarred one and the whole one, clamped around Silas Ridge's throat. He lifted the bounty hunter clean off the floor. He pressed him against the stall, his thumbs digging deep into the man's windpipe. Ridge's feet kicked uselessly in the straw. His clean, handsome face began to turn a dark, congested purple. His icy eyes, now wide with the ultimate terror, bulged. Eli was killing him. He was ending the threat. He was ending the man who had come to take her, the man who had shot him, the man who had brought the whole rotten world into his valley. This was the force, the only force he knew. The world turned red. He was back in Andersonville, his thumbs in a guard's throat. He was back in his burning cabin, his hands on a raider. He was ending it. And then, through the red, killing haze, he saw a face. It was not Ridge's. It was Lorna's. He saw her as she had been just nights before, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror, cowering from him, from his rage. "You're hurting me." He was becoming the thing she feared. He was becoming the monster from her nightmares. The vision was so clear, so real. He could feel her terror, her shaking. A long, shuddering breath tore through him. He was not a monster. He would not be. His grip, the one that was seconds from crushing Ridge's life, loosened. He did not let go. He held the man there for 1 second longer, watching the understanding of his mercy dawn in Ridge's panicked eyes. Then, with a grunt of disgust, he dropped him. Silas Ridge fell in a heap to the barn floor, choking, gasping, clutching his broken rib, his body convulsing as it tried to pull air back into itself. Eli stood over him, breathing in huge, ragged gasps. The adrenaline was draining, and the pain, from his shoulder, from his side, was a roaring fire. He found a length of old rope in the stall. He hauled the gasping, weeping bounty hunter to his feet. Ridge offered no resistance. Eli dragged him from the barn. Ridge's beautiful black horse was still standing where he had left it, ground-hitched, a professional's animal. With a groan of pain and effort, Eli lifted the smaller man and threw him, face down, across the saddle. Ridge cried out as his broken rib took the impact. Eli did not care. He pulled Ridge's hands under the horse's belly and tied them, brutally tight, to his feet. He stood back, his blood dripping onto the snow. He looked at the man, a helpless, trussed package. "Go on." Eli snarled at the horse. He slapped its rump, hard. "Get!" The horse, startled, leaped forward. It broke into a gallop, thundering out of the yard, down the dark canyon, carrying its helpless, choking Ryder away into the wilderness. Eli watched it go. He watched it until the sound of the hoofbeats was swallowed by the wind. And then the strength that had held him up, the primal rage and the soldier's discipline, dissolved. The pain rushed in, a black, roaring tide. His legs buckled. He tried to walk back to the cabin. The 30 feet of muddy yard seemed like 100 miles. He fell against the log wall, his hand sliding down it, leaving a thick, red smear. He made it to the doorway and collapsed, half in, half out, his face pressed to the cold, muddy floor. "Lorna," he whispered. The word was just a puff of air. Lorna. In the cellar, she had heard it all. The shot, the crash, the terrible muffled sounds of the fight, the scream from the barn, the thud of footsteps, the horse galloping away. And then, silence. A silence more terrifying than the noise. She had been crouched on the bottom rung of the ladder, the rifle in her hands, her body shaking, reciting his one final order. "You shoot when I shoot. You shoot when I shoot." He had never shot. She heard the silence stretch, and then, through the floorboards, so faint she almost missed it, she heard her name. The heavy cellar door was thrown open from below. It crashed against the cabin wall. Lorna scrambled up the ladder, her eyes wild, the rifle clutched in her hands. The cabin was a ruin. The table was shattered. The floor was a churn of mud and blood. And she saw him, a dark, unmoving heap in the doorway. "Eli!" She dropped the rifle. She ran to him. She grabbed his arm. He was a dead weight, his face a pale, waxy gray in the twilight. She dragged him, her heels digging into the dirt floor. She got him inside, away from the door, and pushed him onto the cot. He lolled, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and wet. "He is gone," Eli panted, his eyes squeezed shut. "He is gone." "Hush," she said. Her voice was strange. It was not her voice. It was not the voice of a victim. It was cold, steady, and full of a hard, bright anger. She lit the lantern, the flame chasing the shadows back. She saw the blood. The whole left side of his body was a black, soaking mess. She ripped his shirt open, the sound of tearing fabric loud in the small room. She saw the bullet hole in his shoulder, a neat, dark pucker, and she saw the long, ragged gash along his ribs, where the pitchfork had torn him. She did not panic. She did not cry. She went to his small shelf. She found the bottle of whiskey. She found the needle and thread she had used to mend his shirt. She found the small tin box. And from under the cot, she pulled the long, narrow wooden box of surgical tools. She opened it. Her hands were perfectly steady. She went back to him. "This will hurt," she said. It was not an apology. It was a fact. "Lorna," he whispered. She did not wait. She uncorked the whiskey bottle with her teeth and poured the raw, yellow liquid straight into the bullet wound. Eli screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure agony. His back arched off the cot, his hands clawing at the furs. "Hold still," she commanded, her voice like iron. She poured more onto the pitchfork wound. She threaded the needle, her hands sticky with his blood. She did not flinch. Her eyes were bright and focused. She pushed the needle into the torn flesh of his shoulder. He groaned, a low, animal sound, and passed out. "Good," she muttered. She sewed. She worked for an hour in the flickering lantern light. Her head bent, her small, tight stitches pulling the ruined flesh back together. She was a doctor of necessity. Her hands were covered in his blood, but they were as steady as a surgeon's. When she was finished, she bandaged him with strips of cloth she tore from her own petticoat. She was covered in his blood. She sat back, the shaking finally starting, a deep, bone-rattling tremor of reaction. He woke slowly. The pain was a dull, hot ocean. He opened his eyes. She was sitting on the floor by the cot, just watching him. "You should have run," he whispered. "You are a fool, Eli Mercer," she said, her voice quiet. "A terrible, stupid fool. You could have just given him to me." He tried to smile. It was a ghastly grimace that pulled at his scarred face. "He would have found you. Anyway, yes," she said. She looked at his stitched, bandaged body. "And who would have pulled the bullet out then?" A small, strange, warm expression moved across her face. "You are my fool, Eli. Do you understand?" He looked at her, at the blood on her dress, at the fierce, possessive light in her eyes. He nodded. "Once, my fool." The smile he gave her this time was weak, but it was real. It was warm. They both knew this was not over. This was only the first wave. The bigger storm was still out there, gathering its strength. His eyes flickered to the floor, near the wreckage of the table. He dropped it. Lorna followed his gaze. Lying in the mud, stepped on and forgotten, was the folded paper, the wanted poster. She picked it up. She unfolded it. Wanted, Lorna Harris, for murder. She looked at the harsh, black sketch of her own face. She walked to the fire. She did not crumple the paper. She held it, flat, over the coals. She watched the edges brown and curl. She watched the name Lorna Harris blister and turn black. She watched her own face disappear. She held it until the flame licked her fingertips, until the last piece of it was gray ash, floating up the chimney. She had reclaimed her name by destroying it. She went back to the cot. The night was cold. The cabin was a disaster, but the bounty hunter was gone. She sat in the one chair, his chair, and watched him breathe. The wind had died. The wolves were silent. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the shallow rasp of his breath, and the steady, heavy beat of her own heart. The peace lasted 4 days. They were days of strange, quiet domesticity. Eli's wounds, stitched and bound by her steady hands, began to heal. The bullet had passed clean through the muscle of his shoulder, and the pitchfork tines had missed anything vital. He was weak, in a constant, dull pain, but he was alive. He sat in his chair, a blanket wrapped around him, and watched her. Lorna, in those 4 days, took possession of the cabin. She was no longer a guest, no longer a prisoner. She was its keeper. She cleaned the blood from the floor, scrubbing the boards until her knuckles were raw. She nailed a piece of tin over the broken window. She repaired the shattered table, lashing its legs back together with strips of raw hide. She cooked the small portions of food they had, making him eat, tending the fire. She had saved his life. He had saved hers. This new balance, this shared debt, was a foundation stronger than the cabin's leaning walls. The fear between them was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful care. When she changed his bandages, her touch was clinical, firm, and yet not unkind. He bore the pain of it with a stoic silence, his eyes fixed on her face, on the new, hard line of her mouth. On the 5th day, Jed Stone returned. He did not pound on the door this time. He rode into the yard at a slow, funereal pace, his head hanging. He dismounted and stood by his horse, twisting his hat in his hands, unable to approach the cabin. Eli saw him through the crack in the door. "He is back." She felt a cold dread. She followed Eli as he unbarred the door. He stood in the frame, leaning against it for support. "Jed," Eli said. Jed Stone flinched. Startled, he looked up, his face a mask of misery and fear. "Mercer," he choked out. I came to tell you, he is dead." "Lore." "The bounty hunter," Jed said, his voice a low whisper. "Silas Ridge. Some trappers found him, 2 days down the canyon, still tied to his horse. The horse had stopped to drink. He was a mess. Mercer, the broken rib. It must have, well, he had an infection. He died of the fever. And the cold." Lorna let out a breath she had not known she was holding. It was over. The man from Kansas, the man with the paper, was gone. "But that is not why I'm here," Jed said, his voice breaking. He took a step closer, his eyes frantic. "It is his brother, Amos Ridge. You know that name." Mercer. Eli's face, which had been pale and weak, hardened. The flatness returned. I know it. He was at the post, Jed said, his words tumbling out. He came in this morning, looking for Silas. Sledge told him. He told him everything. He told him about the fight, about the girl. He described you, Mercer. He described her. And Eli's voice was cold iron. Amos Ridge is not a bounty man. Jed whispered. He is a killer. He used to ride with, well, it does not matter. He is not here for the law. He is here for blood. He swore he would burn this canyon to the ground. He swore he would kill the man who sent his brother out to die. And the woman, Jed could not say the words. How many? Eli asked. He has 6 men with him, 7 in all. Hard cases. Mercer, men from the railroad camps, men who would kill for a bottle of whiskey. They were buying ammunition. All of it. They were drunk, and they were ready. They are coming here, Eli said. Yes, Jed cried. That is what I am telling you. You have to run. You are hurt. You are one man. She is one woman. You cannot fight 7 men. Take the horses. Take what you can. I will lead you north, up into the passes. They will never find you. You have to go. Eli. Now. Eli looked at Jed. He looked at the frantic, well-meaning man. Then his gaze lifted, past Jed, to the canyon wall, to the patch of snow on the roof, to the scarred land that was his. This is my land, he said, his voice quiet. He turned, slowly, and looked at Lorna. She was standing by the hearth, her hands clenched, her face pale but calm. He looked at her, and his next words were a new vow, a different kind of promise. This is our home. Lorna met his gaze. The fear was there, but beneath it was the new, hard iron she had forged. She had run, she had hidden. She would not do either again. She gave him a single, sharp nod. Jed Stone looked from one to the other, at their shared, mad resolve. He knew he could not change their minds. God help you, he whispered. God help you both. He turned, climbed onto his horse, and rode away, not looking back. He was a good man, but he was not a fool. He was riding for his own life. Eli barred the door. He turned and leaned against it, the pain in his shoulder and side a living, hot thing. We cannot run, he said. I know, she replied. They will come, today, before dark. I know. I am hurt, he said. It was a terrible admission, ripped from his throat. I cannot hold this on my own. You will not, Lorna said. He looked at her. He saw the woman who had sowed his flesh, the woman who had watched her own face burn to ash. He nodded. The next 3 hours were a crash course in war. He was a brutal, impatient teacher, driven by the ticking clock of the approaching riders. He took down the smaller rifle, the one she had held in the barn. We have no time for maybe, he said, his voice a raw command. You will do this. He took her outside, into the cold, bright sun. He set 3 rusted tin cans on a broken section of the collapsed barn, 50 yards away. Hold it, he ordered. He jammed the wooden stock of the rifle hard against her shoulder. Hold it tight. If you hold it loose, it will break your collarbone. You hold it like you mean to kill it. Do you understand? Yes. Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull. Squeeze. She aimed. The barrel wavered. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked like a mule, slamming into her shoulder, sending a shock of pure pain through her. She cried out, stumbling back. The tin can was untouched. Again, he said, his face a mask. It hurt, she whispered, rubbing her shoulder. Pain is a given, he snarled, his own wounds making him merciless. Pain means you are alive. The man who kicked your door in. He does not feel pain. He is dead. Do you want to be alive or do you want to be dead? She set her jaw. She took the rifle. Again, she fired. She missed. Again, she fired. She missed. She fired until her shoulder was a raw, purple knot of agony. She cried, not from the pain, but from the frustration, the hot, angry tears streaming down her face. "I cannot," she sobbed. "Yes," he said, his voice suddenly softer. He put his good hand on her uninjured shoulder. "You can stop aiming at the can. Feel the target. Do not think about the gun. Do not think about the sound. See the can. Feel the bullet hitting the can. Breathe out and let it happen." She took a deep, shuddering breath. She raised the rifle. The stock against her bruised flesh was agony. She ignored it. She saw the center of the middle can. She felt the target. She breathed out. She squeezed. The rifle fired. The middle can spun off the log and disappeared into the snow. She stared. "Again," he said. She hit the second can. Again. She hit the third. A small, cold, terrible smile touched her lips. She looked at Eli, the fire in her eyes. The one he had seen when she kissed him was back. It was not a fire of passion. It was a fire of pure, cold, killing rage. He nodded. "Once." "Good. Now we prepare." They worked as a team. He was the general. She was his hands. His shoulder was bleeding again. A dark stain spee on his bandages. He ignored it. "The cabin is a death trap," he said, his voice low and fast. "It will burn. They know it. We will not be in it, not both of us. The plan is the same," she said. "The barn. It is the only way. They will expect a fight from one place. We give it to them from two. We create a crossfire." He made her climb into the loft. "Check the sight lines. You see the cabin door? You see the yard? Yes, I will be at the window. The one you patched. I will break it out." "What is the signal?" she asked. "There is no signal." He said, "This is not one man. This is a pack. They will rush. The moment they are in the yard, the moment they commit, you fire. You fire at the biggest man. You fire at the man with the axe. You fire at the man who is giving orders. You do not wait for me. You start it." He was giving her the first shot. The trust in that was a heavier weight than the rifle. "Eli, you will not miss," he said. He went back to the cabin. He laid out his own rifle, his pistol, and the small, 2-shot Derringer he had taken from his boot. He checked each one. He was a soldier preparing for his final post. He looked at her, standing in the doorway, the rifle in her hands. "This is our home," he said again. They did not have to wait long. They heard the sound first. It was not a stealthy approach. It was a thunder of hoofbeats, the sound of 7 men riding hard, yelling, drunk and eager for blood. They burst into the canyon, a ragged group of hard-looking men, their faces flushed with whiskey. At their head was a man even larger than Eli. He had a great black beard and a buffalo hide coat. He pulled his horse up, and the others milled around him. This was Amos Ridge. He looked at the small, leaning cabin. He saw the patched window, the barred door. He laughed, a huge, booming sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "He's in there," he roared, pointing. "The coward holed up like a rat. He thinks that little door will stop us." One of the men, holding a torch, looked at him. "Want us to rush it, Amos?" Amos Ridge's smile was a terrible thing. "No, Silas. He was my brother. He'd like to take his time. Let us warm the place up. Flush the rat out." He looked at the man with the torch, and then at the dry, sod roof of the cabin. "Burn it," he said. The man with the torch rode forward. He touched the flame to the dry grass and hides on the eaves. The roof, tinder dry from the sun and the thaw, caught instantly. A line of yellow flame raced across the edge, and in seconds, the whole cabin roof was a sheet of fire. "Now," Amos roared. "Any man who comes out, shoot him." A man with a heavy, long-handled axe dismounted and ran for the cabin door. "I will split it," he yelled. In the loft, Lorna watched. She smelled the smoke. She saw the flames lick the sky. She saw the man with the axe. He was a big man. He was an easy target. She pressed her cheek to the rough wood of the barn wall. Her hands were rock steady. Her shoulder did not exist. She saw the center of the man's back. She felt the target. She breathed out. She squeezed. The report of the rifle was sharp, flat. The man with the axe stopped. He looked down at his own chest, as if confused. He dropped the axe. He fell forward, his face hitting the mud at the cabin door, and did not move. A stunned silence fell over the other 6 men. They looked at their fallen comrade. They looked at the barn, smoke curling from the hole where her rifle barrel was. "In the barn!" one of them screamed. "The bitch is in the barn!" That was when the cabin window exploded outward, a shower of glass and tin. Eli's rifle barked. He was not aiming at the men. He was aiming at the horses. A horse screamed, a high, piercing sound, and fell. He fired again. A second horse went down, its legs folding. The yard was chaos. Men were yelling, jumping from their panicked mounts. They were trapped. They were on foot. "Kill them!" Amos Ridge roared, his face purple with rage. He fired his own pistol at the barn, the bullets thudding harmlessly into the thick logs. "Kill them both!" 2 men ran for the cover of the barn. 2 others stayed with Amos, firing at the cabin. Smoke was pouring from the cabin, thick and black. Eli stumbled out the front door, coughing, his rifle in his hand. He was a perfect target, silhouetted against the inferno of his own home. Amos Ridge saw him. The big man's smile returned. He stepped out from behind a horse, calm, his pistol raised. "For Silas," he said. He fired. The bullet hit Eli square in the chest. The force of it was a physical blow. It was not a tear, like the first bullet. It was a punch. It threw Eli backward, and he fell. His back slamming against the burning wall of the cabin, he slid down, leaving a black smear, and sat unmoving. His head slumped. His rifle fell from his hands. Amos Ridge laughed. He began to walk forward, savoring it. He walked past the dead man at the door. He walked across the muddy, bloody yard. He stopped in front of the slumped figure of Eli Mercer. He raised his pistol and put the barrel 1 inch from Eli's forehead. "Now you pay," he said. Eli looked up. His eyes were dull, his breathing a wet, shallow gasp. "Go! To hell!" he wheezed. His right hand, which had been hidden by his body, moved. It was not fast. It was slow. It was moving toward his boot. Amos Ridge's finger tightened on the trigger. Eli's hand found the small, 2-shot Derringer. He did not lift it. He fired it from his lap, through his own coat. The bang of the small gun was almost lost in the roar of the fire. It was fired at a distance of 1 heartbeat. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of Amos Ridge's massive chest. His eyes went wide. The look of triumph was replaced by a look of profound, stupid surprise. He looked down at the hole, from which no blood had yet come. He looked at Eli. He fell. He did not fall backward. He fell forward, like a great tree, his face landing in the mud at Eli's feet. The other men, all 4 of them, saw it. They saw their leader fall. They saw the cabin engulfed in flames. They heard the crack of Lorna's rifle from the barn. As she fired at the men who had been rushing her, one of them screamed and grabbed his arm. It was too much. This was not a fight. It was a slaughter. They ran. They did not run for their horses. They ran on foot, scrambling over the bodies of their dead, and fled down the canyon. Disappearing into the twilight, the battle was over. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by the roar and crackle of the fire. The wind, which had been absent, returned, a low moan that whipped the flames higher, sending a shower of red sparks into the dark blue sky. The yard was a ruin. Dead horses, dead men, the smell of gun smoke, pine smoke, and the hot, metallic, coppery smell of blood. And Eli Mercer, his body a dark shape against the inferno, did not move. Lorna did not remember dropping the rifle. She did not remember scrambling down the ladder. She was just running. The yard was a nightmare of smoke and shadows. The man she had shot in the back lay like a discarded sack of flour by the steps. The great black-bearded body of Amos Ridge was a dark mound in the mud. Face down, as if in prayer. The air was thick with the roar of the fire and the smell of burning pine, hot metal, and something else, the hot, thick smell of spilled blood. She saw him. He was a slump of shadow against the blazing wall of the cabin. The fire was not just burning the roof, it was consuming the walls. He was sitting in the middle of an inferno, his head on his chest. A section of the roof, a tangle of burning logs and sod, groaned above him. It was going to fall. Eli! She ran into the heat. The air was a physical blow, a solid wall of fire that scorched her lungs and blinded her eyes. She grabbed the front of his shirt. He was a dead weight, heavy as stone, terrifyingly still. She pulled. Her boots slipped in the bloody mud. She was not strong enough. "No!" she snarled, the word a raw, animal sound. She was not the woman from Kansas. She was not the woman who hid. She braced her feet. She put all her weight, all her rage, all her new, terrible will into it. She pulled. He slid. A dead, heavy thing. An inch. The wall above him cracked. She screamed, a sound of pure, primal effort, and hauled him backward. She fell, pulling him on top of her. The cabin roof collapsed. A mountain of fire and sparks and burning logs crashed down exactly where he had been sitting. The sound was a deafening final whoosh, a great greedy sigh as the fire consumed its prize. Lorna lay in the mud, pinned beneath his weight, her face turned aside. She was gasping for air that was not smoke. Embers, carried on the wind, landed on her dress, on her hair, burning small, painless holes. She felt the small, wet, rhythmic puff of his breath against her cheek. He was alive. She pushed and squirmed and clawed her way out from under him. She was covered in his blood. She grabbed him again, under the arms, and dragged him. She dragged him away from the furnace, across the yard, past the dead men, past the dead horses. She dragged him into the one place of shelter left, the ruined barn. She dragged him into the darkness of the lean-to, where the mules stood, their eyes white with terror. She collapsed beside him on the cold, damp straw, and for a full minute, she just gasped, her lungs burning, her mind a perfect, hollow blank. The next 10 days were a new kind of war. It was not a war of bullets and fire. It was a war against the tiny, invisible things that were trying to kill him. She had pulled him into the driest stall, piled old hay for a bed. The cabin, their home, their shelter, was gone. The barn was a ruin, open to the sky, but the lean-to offered a roof, however fragile. She had lit the lantern. She had opened his coat. The small derringer hole in his chest was a deceptively simple, dark stain, but when she ripped his shirt open, she saw the blood bubbling from his lips. The bullet was inside. It had found a lung. She did not weep. She did not panic. Her mind was cold and clear. She was the woman who had held the needle, and she would be the woman who held the knife. She took the tools from the wooden box. She took the last of the whiskey. She built a small, smoky fire in the middle of the barn floor, using wood salvaged from the collapsed stalls. She heated the blade of the thinnest knife until it glowed red. He was unconscious, his breathing a shallow, rattling sound. It was a terrible sound, the sound of a man drowning on dry land. "This will hurt, Eli," she whispered to his unhearing face. "But you will not die. I will not allow it." She made the cut. She followed the path of the bullet, her fingers probing his flesh, searching, feeling the hard grate of a rib. She found it, the small, flattened piece of lead, lodged against the bone. She pulled it out with her bloody fingers and dropped it, a tiny, heavy clink, into a tin cup. She stitched him, as she had before, but this time, it was different. This time, she was not just closing a wound. She was fighting a fever that was already beginning. He burned. For 10 days, he burned. She did not leave the barn. She did not sleep, except in short, gasping bursts. Sitting upright against the stall wall, her hand on his chest, she was counting. She was counting the seconds between his rattling breaths, the frantic, thready beats of his heart. She would sit for hours, her hand flat on his chest, as if she could push her own life, her own stubborn will, into him through her palm. She fetched snowmelt in a bucket, soaking rags to cool his face, to wet his cracked lips. He moaned and thrashed and spoke names she did not know. Sarah. Andersonville. He cried out in his fever dreams, fighting old wars, old ghosts. She held him down, her voice a low, constant murmur. Hush, it is done. Be still. I am here. Be still. And at night, when the cold high desert dark settled, and the wolves, drawn by the smell of the dead horses in the yard, began to howl, she sat at the opening of the barn. She had taken Amos Ridge's rifle. It was a heavy, big-bore buffalo gun, a weapon of immense power. She sat with it across her lap. She did not know if the other 4 men would come back. She did not know if Sledge would come. She did not know what would happen. She just sat, and she waited. The pale moon lit the snow, and the shadows of the canyon walls were long and black. The rifle was heavy on her knees. It was not just a tool for killing. It was her spine. It was her certainty. It was the physical proof that she was no longer a person who ran. She was a person who waited. On the morning of the 11th day, the light in the barn changed. The constant, terrible, rattling sound from the straw pile had softened. It was just breathing. Lorna had fallen asleep, her head against the wooden wall, the heavy rifle leaning beside her. She woke to a touch. It was not a grab. It was not a push. It was a hand, shaking with a profound weakness, touching her hair matted with smoke, dirt, and dried blood. She looked up, her heart stopping. Eli's eyes were open. They were not the wild, glazed eyes of the fever. They were his. They were clear. They were weak and full of pain. But they were his. He looked at her. He saw the soot on her face, the raw exhaustion. He saw the buffalo gun leaning against the wall. He saw the empty whiskey bottle, the bloody rags, the small knife from the box. He saw what she had done. His hand, the good one, trembled as he touched her cheek. A single, dry sob broke from her. It was the only time she had cried. It was a sound of absolute, agonizing relief. The war was over. She had won. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. She did not need him to ask. She scrambled to her feet. "Water," she whispered. She ran to the bucket, her body light, her hands shaking for the first time. "I will get you water." It took 2 more days for him to stand, leaning on her. The yard was a horror. The bodies of the 3 raiders lay where they had fallen, frozen now in the mud. "We have to," he rasped, his voice a ruin. "I know," she said. It was a grim, silent task. He was too weak to dig. He sat on a log, his face gray, the buffalo gun across his knees, and watched. He was the guard. She was the undertaker. She found a spade in the barn, its handle half charred. She dragged the bodies, one by one, to a low place behind the barn, out of sight of the spring. The ground was hard. It took her hours. She did not say a prayer. She did not offer a word. She was not burying men. She was cleaning a mess. She was putting the poison back in the earth. When she was done, she rolled heavy stones onto the shallow graves to keep the animals from them. She stood back, her breath pluming in the cold air. Eli had walked up, leaning heavily on a piece of burned timber. They stood together, looking at the 3 mounds of rock. The moral line, once so blurred and gray, was now as clear and bright as the winter sun. It was them, or it was us, and they had chosen us. They turned and faced the cabin. It was gone. It was a black, rectangular scar on the snow. A chimney of river stones stood at one end, a lonely monument to a life that was over. Eli walked to the ruin, his movements stiff. He stood where the hearth had been. He looked down into the cooling ashes. "Eli," she said gently, "there is nothing left." He did not seem to hear. He leaned his stick against the chimney and knelt. He began to dig in the gray, soft ash with his good hand. "What are you looking for?" He did not answer. He just dug, sifting the ash through his fingers. Then his hand stopped. He pulled an object out. It was a small, heavy, misshapen lump of metal. It was blackened and melted, but the color of it was unmistakable. It was gold. Lorna knew, instantly. It was Sarah's wedding ring, the one from the life before, the one he had failed to save. He stood, the melted ring in the palm of his hand. He looked at it. It was the last piece of the ghost. It was the physical shape of his guilt, the thing that had locked him in this canyon for all these years. He closed his hand on it, his knuckles white. He turned, walked past her, his bad leg dragging. He walked to the deep, cold spring that bubbled up from the rocks behind the barn. He stood at the edge for a long time. He looked at Lorna, who had followed him. She met his gaze. She did not speak. She just nodded. Once. He opened his hand. He looked at the lump of gold one last time, and he threw it into the water. It hit with a small, quiet plop, and vanished. The black water rippled, and then was still. He had let her go. Lorna watched the ring spread and fade. She reached into the pocket of her torn, bloody dress. Her fingers found the paper she had salvaged from the mud, the paper she had hidden. She pulled it out, the bride contract. Sledge's name. Her name. The word belong. She did not need the spring. She needed fire. She walked to the small fire she had built, the one that had heated the knife. She knelt. Eli watched her. She did not crumple the paper. She held it flat, by the corner. She held it to the small, clean flame. She watched the edges curl. She watched the word belong turn brown, then black, then vanish in a flake of gray ash. She held it until the flame licked her fingertips. She was free. They stood in the cold, clean air. They had no food, no shelter, and no past. "We cannot stay here," he whispered, his voice still raw. "This place is a grave." "I know," she said. He looked up. He lifted his hand, not at the ruin, but past it, up the steep side of the canyon, to a small, flat place where a stand of tall pines grew. "There," he said, "on the pine slope." She followed his gaze. It was higher up. It was defensible. "It overlooks the valley," she said, understanding. "It sees the sun," he replied, giving a different reason. He looked at her, and the shadow of the soldier was gone, replaced by the man who had built a chair, the man who had planted corn. "We will build a new house," he said, "a house for the living." He offered her his hand. "No cellar." She took it. Her hand was small, and rough, and stained with his blood. "No locks," she said. The work was the cure. It took weeks. Eli was still weak, his chest bound tight, his left arm useless in a sling. He worked one-handed. He felled the smaller trees, his breath hissing with the effort, the axe thudding. She, in turn, became the muscle. She hauled the logs, stripping the bark, her hands blistering, then healing, then callousing. They were a strange, broken, two-person building crew. He was the engineer. She was the labor. They built. He showed her how to notch the logs, how to set them. She learned to mix the mud and straw, to chink the walls against the wind. She set the door frame herself, making sure it was square. The work was brutal, but it was honest. Every log they set was a word and a new vow. Every handful of mud was a prayer. One afternoon, a log slipped from his one-handed grip and rolled down the slope. He swore, a long, complex, and surprisingly creative string of curses. Lorna stopped, her arms aching, her face smeared with mud. She looked at his furious, frustrated expression. A sound bubbled up in her chest. It was dry, rusty. It was a laugh. He stopped swearing. He looked at her, his mouth open. She laughed, a real, full laugh that echoed in the clean, pine-scented air. He stared at her for a long second, stunned, and then his own ruined face cracked. A low, hoarse, scraping sound came from his chest. It was a terrible sound, The sound of a man who had forgotten how... He laughed, too hoarse. Raw laughter returned to the high slope. When the house was built, it was small. It was just one room, but the door was strong. The roof was tight, and the window looked out over the entire canyon. But they were starving. The preserves were gone. They had no flour, no salt, no seed for the spring. "We have to go back," he said. The ride to the post was silent. He rode his gelding. She rode one of the mules. His rifle was in his saddle scabbard. Hers was, too. They looked like two soldiers, riding out of the wilderness. When they walked into Sledge's trading post, the conversation stopped. The same men were there, the trappers, the loafers. They looked up. Sledge was behind his counter. When he saw them, his face went the color of dirty snow. He looked at Eli, alive. He looked at Lorna, alive, with a rifle on her back. He knew Amos Ridge had gone up that canyon. He knew 7 men had gone, and he knew that only these 2 had come back. He was looking at 2 ghosts. Eli did not speak of the fight. He did not threaten. He walked to the counter, his bad leg dragging, his body stiff. He was a pillar of quiet, deadly intent. "Sledge," he said, his voice flat. "We need supplies, seed corn, flour, salt, ammunition." Sledge was shaking. He could not find his oily voice. "Yes," he squeaked. "Yes, sir. Of course. Mr. Mercer." One of the trappers, half drunk, stumbled back and bumped into Lorna. He turned, ready to curse, and he saw her face. He saw her eyes. He saw the woman who had survived the fire, the woman who had buried the dead. His mouth fell open. He snatched his hat from his head. "Ma'am," he stammered. "Pardon me, ma'am." Lorna looked at the man. She nodded. Once, and walked past him to stand beside Eli. The legend of the man with the scarred face and the silent woman who had fought a war had begun. Spring came to the high canyon not as a gentle greening, but as a slow, aching thaw. The snow receded, leaving the land muddy and scarred. The black rectangle of the burned cabin was a stark, weeping wound on the hillside. But higher up, on the pine slope, the new house stood. It was small and rough, but it was solid, and the smoke that rose from its new chimney was pale gray, a sign of a clean, hot fire. The scars healed. Eli's chest wound, the one she had cut open to pull the lid from, closed into a puckered, angry red line. His shoulder remained stiff. He would always carry the memory of the bullets in the set of his body, a dull ache that flared up with the cold rains, but his hand, his good hand, was steady again. He could heft the axe, his aim true. Lorna's own scar, the one on her shoulder where the rifle butt had slammed into her, faded. The deep, dark purple of the bruise lightened, softened, and finally vanished, leaving just a tenderness in the muscle, a memory of the day she had learned to send death down a metal barrel. They were a pair of damaged, mended creatures, their history written on their skin. Life fell into a rhythm, dictated by the sun and the soil. They had bought seed corn from Sledge, and they planted it together in the small, rich patch of earth by the spring, the same patch Sarah had written about in her journal. He, with his one good arm, would punch a hole in the soft earth with a stick. She would follow, dropping 2-3 kernels into the dark, and cover it with her boot. It was a silent, shared task, a conversation held with the land. In the evenings, they worked. He had his own ranching to do, the few pigs to tend, traps to set for the small game that would keep them fed. She mended his boots, the leather stiff and worn, her stitches small and tight, just as they had been on his shirt. An eternity ago, they had found a stack of old newspapers at the post, left by a freighter. They were 6 months old, full of news from a world that did not exist. Lorna would read to him by the firelight. Her voice was low and clear, and she sounded out the strange names of places. Ohio, Chicago. She read about new railroads, about politics, about a world of factories and crowds. He would sit, his hands busy, perhaps carving a new latch or cleaning his pistol. He would listen, his scarred face unreadable in the firelight. Here, in the high canyon, the future was not measured in railroad stock or presidents. It was measured in the height of the young. Green corn shoots. It was measured in the quiet, shared stories of an evening. One afternoon in late May, a visitor came. He was a thin, tired-looking man on a tired-looking mule, wearing a black coat greened with age. He was a traveling preacher, a Methodist circuit rider, and he was hopelessly lost. He saw their cabin, a puff of smoke against the pine, and had ridden up, expecting, perhaps, to be met with a gun. Instead, Eli had simply nodded to him. "You look lost, preacher." Lorna had brought the man water, and then a plate of stewed rabbit. He ate with a desperate, starved gratitude, his eyes darting between the large, scarred man and the quiet, watchful woman. He saw the single room, the one wide bed built into the wall, the two rifles leaning by the door. He saw the way she moved around him, the way his eyes followed her. He was a man who traded in sin and salvation, and he made his calculations. When he had finished, he wiped his mouth and set the plate down. "The Lord bless this house," he said, his voice stronger now with food. "And this union. I thank you for your charity." He looked at them, his gaze direct. "Tell me, my children, have you been joined in the eyes of God? Have you had your marriage sanctified? Lor—" She looked at her hands. The question was a relic from that other world, the world of newspapers and laws and papers. Eli did not move. He was staring at the preacher, his expression flat. "We have no paper," Eli said, his voice a low rumble. "We are not married." The preacher's face stiffened. "Mister, a man and a woman living thus, it is a sin. But we would have you witness a promise." Eli cut him off. The preacher paused, confused. "A promise?" "Yes," Eli said. He stood and looked at Lorna. He did not ask her to stand. He did not command. He waited. She stood and came to be beside him, in front of the small, stone hearth. The preacher looked from one to the other. This was not in any book he carried, but he saw the truth in their eyes. It was a truth as hard and real as the mountains. "Very well," he said, rising. He was a man of God, but he was also a man of the West. The right thing was the thing that worked. Speak your promise, and he will hear it. They stood on the new porch, the weak, spring sun on their faces. The preacher held his worn Bible, but he did not open it. Eli turned to her. He did not take her hand. "Lorna," he said, his voice rough, "you have my name. You have my back. I will keep you from the fire. That is my promise." She looked up at him, at his ruined, beautiful face. Her voice was not a whisper. It was as clear and steady as the stream. "You do not belong to me, Eli Mercer. You belong to yourself." She paused, and her hand, the one that had held the knife, came up and rested on his chest, over the new scar. "And as for me, do not let me go." He covered her hand with his. "Never." The preacher, his eyes wet, cleared his throat. It is done. As God is my witness, it is done." He left an hour later, his belly full, his mule provisioned. He rode down the canyon, a man with a story he would tell for the rest of his days, about the covenant he had witnessed on a pine slope, between a soldier and a woman with a killer's eyes. The next time they went to the post, the world had changed. The story, as stories do, had traveled. Jedstone, who had been mending a harness by the door, saw them ride up. He did not just wave. He nodded, a slow, deep gesture of respect. He looked at Eli, and then at Lorna, and he smiled. They walked inside. The same knot of drunkards was by the stove. They saw them, and the loud, boisterous talk stopped. It just stopped. One of them, the one who had bid on Lorna, the one who had been so drunk, suddenly found his boots fascinating, and he shuffled out of their path, his face pale. Sledge was behind the counter. He saw them, and he swallowed, a visible, hard bob of his Adam's apple. Good morning," he stammered. Mr. "Mercer, ma'am." He fumbled with their order. His oily smoothness gone, his hands shaking. He was no longer a man in charge. He was a shopkeeper, and he was terrified of his customers. They paid in pelts and walked out, a silent, clear path opening for them. They were not just settlers. They were not just survivors. They were a sovereign nation of two. Back at the cabin, Eli worked on a new project. He had salvaged some good, seasoned wood from the burned barn. He was building a chair. "The other one," he said, not looking at her. "The one Ridge broke. It was hers. Sarah's. The one she wrote about." "I know," Lorna said. "This one," he said, testing the leg. "This one is for you." He worked on it for 3 days. It was a simple, sturdy chair, but the wood was sanded smooth. The joints were tight. He was atoning, with his hands, for the violence that had broken the first one. When it was finished, he set it by the fire. "It is done." Lorna ran her hand over the smooth arm. She sat in it. It was strong. It was comfortable. That night, she sat in her chair, and he sat on his stool, and she read to him about the great railroad in Ohio, and the world felt, for the first time, very far away. The memory of the fire, of the fight, did not fade. It became a part of their landscape, like the graves behind the barn. They spoke of it, not often, but with a strange, clinical distance. They were soldiers, recounting a battle, learning its lessons. "He was fast," Eli said one night, staring into the fire. "Silas Ridge. I underestimated him. You were hurt." Lorna said she was cleaning her own rifle, her movements deft and sure. "You were not thinking." "I was thinking of the cellar," he said, a quiet admission. "I was thinking of the old fear. It made me slow." "He was arrogant," she said. "He was talking when he should have been looking. That is what killed him." "No," Eli said. He looked at her. "You killed the man at the door. I killed Amos. We were a crossfire. It was a good plan." They were not talking about murder. They were talking about tactics. They were talking about the discipline of force. They were reminding each other that the rage, the force he knew, was a tool, like the axe. It had to be aimed. It had to be controlled. And it was a tool they now shared. The new house had a new, thick door. It had a heavy wooden bar he had carved for it, but they seldom used it. They did not need it. The old boundaries, the ones of locks and cellars, had been burned away. In their place were new, softer lines. He would come in from the cold, and he would stand by the fire. He would not touch her. He would wait. He would wait for her to look up, to smile, to nod, and only then would he cross the room, put his hands on her shoulders. When they lay in the wide, comfortable bed, he did not take. He asked, his hands, his eyes, his body. They were a constant question. Is this right? Is this good? And she, in turn, learned the new, powerful language of saying yes, with her eyes, with her hands, with her body, their hearts, which had been locked for so long. In fear, in guilt, they were not open, but they had found the key, and the key was not force. It was consent. The silence of the new cabin was a different thing. The silence of the old cabin had been a vacuum, a terrified, breathless, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. It was the silence of defense. This new silence was full. It was the quiet of the wind in the high pines. It was the crackle of the fire. It was the sound of him breathing beside her in the dark. It was the peace that came not from the absence of noise, but from the absence of fear. They were no longer on guard. They were just home. One night, she was sitting beside him on the cot, the fire low. She was tracing the scar on his chest, the one she had made, the one she had stitched. Her finger followed the raised, puckered line. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the dark. He was quiet for a long time. He took her hand, the one that was tracing his wound, and held it, pressing it flat against his heart. He turned his head and looked at her, his scarred face soft in the dim light.
"Less,"
he whispered.
"It hurts less every time you look at me like that."
The summer heat came to the high canyon, baking the new mud chinking in the walls of the new house until it was hard as stone. The spring, the one that had bubbled up near the burned foundation, ran deep and cold, and the patch of corn they had planted grew with a fierce, stubborn life. By the first touch of frost in late September, the stalks stood over Lorna's head, their ears heavy and full. The small herd of goats they had acquired, a buck and 2 nannies, were fat and sleek from the summer grazing. The canyon, which had been a grave, was now a garden. In the evenings, the new house, the one that sat high on the pine slope, was filled with a scent that was the antithesis of smoke and gunpowder. It was the smell of hot cornbread, baked in a heavy skillet on the hearth. It was the smell of salt pork, frying. It was the smell of enough. The story had found its way down the canyon. It had trickled into Sledge's post, carried by Jed Stone, by the few trappers who had dared to ride up and see the rock graves for themselves. The story grew, as stories do in the West. It was told over whiskeys, over campfires. They told of the woman, the one who had been bought for a bloody badge, the one who had shot a man in the back from a barn loft, a killing shot, while the cabin burned. They told of the scarred man, shot in the chest, who had still found the strength to kill the outlaw leader with a tiny gun hidden in his boot. They were not just Mercer and his contract. They were the Mercers. They were a fact of the landscape now, as real and as dangerous as the mountains themselves. The circuit preacher, the one who had stumbled upon them, told his own story. He spoke, in hushed, awed tones, of the promise he had witnessed. He told of a covenant made not with paper or with rings, but with a simple, brutal honesty. A vow made in the face of death. In the East, it would have been a scandal, a sin, but in Wyoming, it was respected. A promise sealed by fire and blood was worth more than any piece of paper filed in a distant, civilized courthouse. They had not married. They had promised, in this land, justice was what worked. A contract was just a piece of paper. A promise was what you were willing to die for. Their new house was a fortress, but it was a fortress of light. It sat on the high slope, and from the single, wide window, they could see the entire mouth of the canyon. They could see the trail for a mile in either direction. There were no blind spots. There were no shadows they could not see. The sun, which had struggled to find the old, leaning cabin in the canyon floor, flooded this new room every morning. It was a house built for watching the world approach, not for hiding from it. And the door, the heavy, thick plank door Eli had hewn and set himself, had no lock. The heavy wooden bar he had carved rested in its brackets on the wall. They never used it. It was a relic, a symbol of a time that was over. The true lock was the understanding between them. The true bar was the line they had drawn in the mud of the yard, and defended with their lives. Every touch now was an invitation. Every glance was a question asked and freely answered. They did not hide. As the seasons turned, a small, new community began to form, with their canyon at its center. Jed Stone began to ride up once a week, sometimes bringing his wife, sometimes his quiet, 10-year-old son. And Eli, the man who had been a silent ghost, began to teach. He took the boy out, far from the house, and set up tin cans on the same log Lorna had used. He showed him the small rifle. He taught him safety. He taught him respect. "You never point this." Eli's voice, still rough from the fire, would carry on the cold, clear air. "At anything you do not intend to kill. It is not a toy, it is a tool. It has rules. You must learn the discipline of it." He was not just teaching the boy to shoot. He was teaching him how to control the force. Lorna, too, found herself a teacher. Jed's wife, a thin, nervous woman, began to bring 2 other women from the smaller ranches nearby. They would come and sit in Lorna's clean cabin, in the sturdy chairs Eli had built. They came to see her, She was a legend. She was the woman who had faced down 7 men and won. She was the woman who had stitched her man back to life. They watched her, their eyes wide. She taught them. She showed them a new, stronger stitch for mending harness. She showed them how to read the labels on the tins from Sledge's store. A new community was forming, built not on laws or contracts, but on shared survival. A community built around the man who taught the discipline of force and the woman who taught the discipline of healing. One day, Jed brought a letter. It was crumpled, stained, 6 months old. It had been sent from Kansas, addressed to the marshal at Fort Laramie, and had eventually found its way to Sledge's post. It was an official paper, inquiring after a woman named Lorna Harris. Lorna took it, her hand steady. She read it, standing on her new porch, the wind pulling at her hair. The letter stated that the warrant for her arrest was void. The stepfather's testimony had been found false. The cavalrymen he had sold her to had been caught and, under questioning for other crimes, had confessed. The charges were dropped. She was, in the eyes of the distant, civilized law, a free woman. Eli stood beside her, watching her face. She read the paper twice, the paper that could have saved her life, or ended it. Had arrived too late. It meant nothing. She had already freed herself. With a bullet, with a needle, with a vow. She looked at Eli. "If anyone comes," she said, her voice quiet. "If a marshal ever does ride up this canyon, we have a new law," Eli said. He took the letter from her. He did not burn it. He did not save it. He just folded it and handed it back to her. "We tell the truth. We tell them what happened. We tell them who is buried behind the barn." He looked out over the valley, his home. Justice here is measured in who is left standing. It is measured in the people who are still alive. She put the letter in the kindling box. It was just paper. The pain of the past was still there. It lived in their bodies, a map of their shared history. One night, as they sat by the fire, he moved his shoulder, and a sharp, sudden wince of pain tightened his face. The cold weather made the old wounds ache. She saw it. She put down her sewing and went to him. She stood behind his chair and put her hands on his stiff, scarred shoulder. She began to knead the tight, ropey muscle, her strong fingers working deep, chasing the pain away. He let out a long, slow breath and leaned his head back against her. She looked at his face, at the ruined side of it, the side that had made him a monster to the world. Her fingers came up and gently, without pity, traced the puckered, scarred line. "It is just a map, Eli," she whispered. He closed his eyes. He sighed, a sound of deep, profound release. The pain was still there. It would always be. But it was no longer just pain. It was the price they had paid. It was the story of how they had been forged. The music of their life was the ordinary. It was the sound of the wind in the high pines, a sound that was no longer a threat, but just the wind. It was the sound of the new logs groaning and settling as the house warmed and cooled in the changing seasons. It was the sound of her needle pulling thread, the sound of his knife carving a new handle for a tool. The miracle was not the survival. The miracle was this, the everyday, the simple, quiet now. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. It painted the far canyon walls a deep, impossible red. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of the coming winter. But this winter, they had a full root cellar. They had a tight roof, and they had each other. She leaned her head against his good shoulder. He felt so solid, so permanent. "Do you remember?" she asked, her voice quiet. "At the old foundation? In the snow?" He knew exactly what she meant. He turned his head, his rough, scarred cheek brushing her hair. "I remember," he said. "You said." "I know what I said." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the last sliver of sun disappear, leaving the sky a deep, bruised purple. He pulled the thick wool blanket they were sharing tighter around her shoulders. His voice, when he spoke, was low and rough, and full of a truth he had spent a lifetime learning. It was the same hoarse whisper he had used that day, but the words were different. The meaning was new. "Force," he said, "is not the only thing I know anymore." She looked up at him. She saw the soldier, the medic, the killer, the builder. She saw her home. She smiled. He looked down at her, and his own ruined face cracked into that new, unused expression. He smiled back. The storm was over. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.